Yeah, I just started to.
Interventions tend to
Okay.
be at that scale. If you're thinking at the scale of 50 million, then I think you're thinking at the right scale.
Well, keep in mind that was actually a thing called Rotary Youth for a Better World until Rotary came and said you can't use the word Rotary, but it wasn't us. It was just a bunch of young people who got together and said, "Well, who are
Yeah.
we?" They were mostly
Mm,
interactors and some rotoractors.
yes.
And when they said, "Who are
Mm,
we?" Well, we're Rotary Youth for a Better World. But Rotary didn't like
yeah.
them using the name, so we had to discontinue all the use of that name. But that 50 million was intended for the youth, for the young people. So
Mm,
when we think that, because there's more than a billion population in Africa, but when we think of that youth category, maybe 16 to 24, something like that, 50 million is a significant
mm.
percentage.
No, it is because what would need to do is get to the concept of critical mass.
Yeah, yeah,
What is it going to take to cause some kind of transformation? And then you can say this is a group which can go out and cause and influence change,
yes.
you know.
So you're hitting upon two topics for today. And the one is really, well, what were the things when we think of going back, let's say, to the beginning of the last century, and the state of the world and how we saw in the late 1940s, 1950s was a huge jump in prosperity in one part of the world in particular, and that was the United States, and Canada to a degree, but then others followed. But for most of the world, especially the developing countries, none of that happened. And even if we think of China, nothing like that happened for another 30 years. And then all of a sudden, bang. Why? How? What was the catalyst that made all that possible? That's what we're going to talk about today, to get an understanding of how we got to where we are and what it might take to close the gaps for the rest of the world. I mean, let's face it, that's primarily what the UN has been striving for decades now, is to say their purpose is peace. Well, one of the things that makes peace difficult is when we have great inequalities in the world. So a big part of their goal has been how do we reduce the inequalities? And the SDGs just divide that up into all different categories: education, hunger, and all these areas. But it's all about reducing the inequalities among people. So we reduce the need for people to be resentful or to be envious. We need to keep that within limits. So that's a big thing of what we're going to be talking about today, and then talking a little bit about, okay, if there are certain things we see that distinguished countries that made big leaps and all the countries that have been able to not do that, then we can get into the discussion. Okay, what can we do to try to create the situations that led to those rapid changes? Okay, I see 9:08. Okay, we're going to wait just another 2 minutes here and see who might still join us. Um, Other than that, I did get the recording up there from last week, and the previous 2 weeks actually. So 3 weeks, the last 3 weeks of meetings, I was able to get those up to YouTube, and I will share those here later on today. Okay, so
Bill, if I may, as we
yes.
wait, are you able to send me a copy of that document that you just showed me on the screen?
Oh,
Could
okay.
you
I
send that
can.
to me by WhatsApp?
Yes, I will be happy to do that. And
I'll be
just for
happy to
your
read that. Yes.
information, the we had a discussion with some young people. Actually, it began. I'm trying to think if I think it was Ghana, but there may have been some young people from Kenya that were involved in talking about they're starting an initiative to create a video for Vision Africa 2030, because one of the things that we've seen is to start, you've got to get the population to see a vision that they would like and think that this is a vision worth fighting for. So their idea,
Yeah, a compelling vision. That's true.
correct. So their idea was to create a video of the Africa that could be. Imagining
Mm,
here, let's say 20, 30, 40 years into the future, what could Africa look like? And creating
mm,
a video that presents life in that era, the post SDG accomplishment era, if you would, and then
mm,
to get that broadcast as widely as possible, and then get discussion groups talking about, hey, is that the way we'd like to live? And if so,
mm,
to get the
mm,
discussion going, how do we get there? So to create an army, that idea of getting 50 million people working towards achieving a goal, because
mm.
it's one thing when a government comes, and I think here the African Union has been talking about, oh, 2063. Well, I don't know,
Yes, the
what
so-called Africa vision. Yeah.
right. So I don't know here, even if we go back 5 years ago, what a 20-year-old at that period is thinking about, oh, yeah, I'm really going to fight for this thing that's going to happen when I'm 63 years old. I don't know if a 20-year-old gets excited about something that's not going to happen until they're in their 60s. So,
No, certainly not.
yeah. So anyway,
It
that's
would be interesting. I mean, one of the things I'd be very interested in seeing about that video is this is going to give the youth a chance to define what do they think their future should look like.
exactly.
And oftentimes, yeah, we may want to involve them in one or two focused discussions, but you tend to find that the future is defined by the present. So
Yes.
one of the things I'd be keen to pick out in that video is how are these people defining their future?
Yes.
And is it similar to the way we are defining the future for them?
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, and I'm going to start the meeting in just a minute, but what's very interesting about that for young people, if you're growing up in a small remote village somewhere, your imagination of that future, you've never seen anything about that future. You've never seen any pictures or especially videos of what that life could be like. So the issue gets down to, what are you fighting for? If you can't imagine where it's taking you, it's very hard to get excited and put in extreme energies to try to get somewhere when you don't know what that thing looks and feels like. So that was part of the idea. Anyway,
Yeah, Bill, I
yes,
just like to
Joe.
say something. Yeah, hi. Sorry, I missed a couple of meetings because I had other meetings. So, and today I have to leave by 11, just so you know,
Mhm.
if I get lost. So regarding the youth, maybe what they should be looking at is not how it affects them when they're in their 60s, but what kind of world they would want for youth that would be in their youthful years in those years.
Yeah.
So it's more of their gift to the future rather than how they benefit from it. And one project I can tell you, and this happened 30 years ago. I was in Jamaica to do a water project, and there was this young lady that was doing a project about fatherhood, and there's a problem in Jamaica with fatherhood. Um, and so they the youth came up with a campaign to bypass the adults and go to the schools to teach responsibility of fatherhood. And I said, "Oh, really?" And they said, "Yeah, because it's already ingrained in the adults that this is the way. We're not going to change them. Change takes too long. But if we have people understanding it for the future, it would make a difference." So
Mhm.
it was to benefit the future.
Yeah, I think here we have to be very careful, because a lot of times you get very dedicated activists who would even be willing to sacrifice their lives for the lives of the future generations. But that's that's not the bulk of people and the issue. Well, let me just start the meeting and we can get into the discussion of that. Ding. I'm Bill Graham. I'm the president of the Rotary Dare to Be Great Global eClub, the go-to place for those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world, the whole world, and daring enough to try. Today is September 27, and I declare this meeting to be open. The topic for today's meeting is something we just briefly touched on at the end of the last meeting, is trying to understand where is the world right now? What's driving the changes that are taking place in the world, and where did it come from? How did we get here? So that we can understand the things that are happening, which are for the most part a continuum of things that happened sometime in the past. And so we're going to explore a little bit of this. I have had over the past few weeks uh, done quite a lot of deep research with all the major AI models on this topic to say, okay, the world was progressing at a certain way, and then all of a sudden some things changed. What changed them or what enabled them to be changed at that point? And when we look at certain parts of the world where the changes took place and held, and other parts of the world where they didn't take place or didn't hold, and to see how the world has become more polarized, the inequalities greater, and during the last 80 plus years. And why has it been so difficult to close those gaps? Why have some countries been unable to follow the examples of other countries where prosperity became more widespread? What were the situations or the events that made the changes possible? And to explain where we're at right now, and particularly including things like artificial intelligence. Um, Artificial intelligence didn't just self-invent itself and self-come about. It's the result of a lot of sequences of events over history. And what are those? And why is it driving? And where is it driving us to? So that we can better understand those. Anyway, that is the topic for today. Does anybody want to add any comments before we dive into? I'll start off by explaining what AI sort of concluded was a major catalyst that sort of changed the trajectory of the way things were going and started us on this the path that we're currently on. So, yes, Senator.
Thank you very much, Bill. I feel honored to be here among this august people, as I am also the Rotarian for the last 35 years. So I'm also Paul Harris, but not actively right now. The reason being that I have got assignment from the government as the senator as well. But as you said, this AI, I want to say just few things as it was, as you said, in the last 80 years, especially it was started in 1945 when the events come up, and the first time ever in the history the name of this artificial intelligence started with 1945. Since then it is developing, and it is based on the computing power of computer, which comes now drastically in the last few years, and especially in last year when it comes. What I believe is this very shortly, I don't want to take much time, but what I believe is this: we should try to say this thing to the world, that please try to learn the basics of AI and use it, because Now we are talking about the latest thing is that AI is for all. It depends how much you learn it, how much you move it, how move with this. It comes in all the fields of life. So, sir, my humble request is this, that we should speak this loudly, that coming era is AI era, and it's today. Even like those who knows this thing, I mean, I never wanted to be an expert, or as well as a degree holder or a certified person. What I would love to be, that I should know how I can use the AI in my normal life, because this is going to increase my development as well, and as well as it can it may make me better in my profession. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, AI and over the past several months, a lot of our sessions have been demonstrating and explaining tools and how we could use those tools for a lot of different things, how they're being used for in the area of medicine and discovery of treatments and so forth. Also, how it's being used in education to make it possible for anybody to learn anything extremely quickly. So there's a lot of positives, but we've also talked about the risks of AI literally disrupting society as we know it and the economies as we know it, perhaps even destroying that. And there are not a few. There's a number of people who are experts who have been driving forces in creating the AI that we currently have that have predicted that AI may end up destroying humanity, and not in 20, 30, 40 years, but in as little as 5 to 10 years, and some scenarios that might lead to that. But the interesting thing that I found in the discussions with AI was the conclusion that AI has nothing to do with technology, with immediate technology or computers at all. And that was something that was very surprising to me. Uh, AI, well, what it really came up to is saying, okay, what caused, and we look at the United States, if we look at the first half of the 20th century, it was only at the end of World War II that one country in particular all of a sudden took off like a rocket. And one could say, oh, there's a lot of reasons. Most of the rest of the mostly developed world was destroyed or having to recover after World War II, and the United States didn't have that problem. But the conclusion that it really came up with was that it was the break with tradition. World War II, what it did was it yanked a large percentage of the entire population out of their routine lifestyle, of the path that they would have taken in their lives. It yanked them out there of that. Either they were pulled into the military or they got engaged in on the home front in building all the war materials. And the magnitude of that is something that was very surprising. One out of every five Americans, one out of every five between 1940 and 1947 moved across a state line, left the state where they grew up and moved somewhere else to work in the defense industry or to go into the military. And that disruption of their lives was so extreme because obviously, if you went into the military and you were in war, that's very different from whatever your lifestyle would have been. On the other hand, if you went into the defense industry, the defense industry was under extreme competition, competing with the enemy countries to see who could produce the most, the fastest, and have the logistics to get the materials to where they're needed. So all these people that were living a normal life, working at a normal routine pace, all of a sudden they were thrust into this totally different lifestyle that was based on optimization, optimization, optimization. It got so extreme that most people aren't aware. But for example, a ship, a transport ship, to be able to transport materials across the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans, they built an entire ship in 4.5 days. 4.5 days to build an entire ship. Got to the point where they were building bombers, planes, airplanes. I think it was, they were building a new plane every hour or so. So that all these people were working at a pace and they were figuring out how do we optimize the production. So that what we had was a break in tradition. So the way life worked for the majority for almost all Americans prior to World War II was disrupted, and it was broken, and for such a long time, and at such an extreme way that what they were doing every day in their lives during those war years was totally different that it totally reshaped the mindset of a large, very, very large segment of Americans as to what's normal. So they couldn't go back. So it was this destruction, if you would, of tradition, destruction of the normal path of life. That was the first catalyst, the first requirement to dramatically change the trajectory of an entire country. And that having them thrust into this mode of constantly saying, how do we improve? How do we make this better? How do we optimize this? Whether you were doing that in a defense factory or whether you were doing that in on the battlefield, but everybody was looking at this extreme competition. How do we change things and optimize things? And when the war ended, obviously, that was the mindset. That's the way people were thinking. On top of that, because of this change, it resulted in a huge number of Americans being trained to be managers, to deal with logistics, to deal with strategy, to deal with innovation. So you had this huge momentum in those areas. And you had this exposure prior to the war. Most Americans, they grew up in their community and they only took on whatever jobs were available in their community. That was their expectation of life, and that's what all they saw. But during the war years, everybody was realizing there's this whole big world out there, and they saw things that caused them to make great changes. Eisenhower, who was the leading American general in the war in Europe, he came back. He became president, and he remembered that he had seen that in Germany, this Autobahn system enabled the movement, the transportation of goods and materials extremely quickly around the country. And the United States at the time had a very weak transportation infrastructure. So he initiated the interstate highway system that built highways all around the United States. And so this this enabled all that competitive thinking and innovative thinking to now say, how do we leverage this infrastructure capability? And plus, they had this thing called the GI Bill in America that returning veterans from the war had got financial support for housing. And between the transportation possibilities plus the GI Bill for housing resulted in a literal explosion in people moving from the inner cities into the suburbs. So this huge a movement where such a large percentage of the population all of a sudden had houses and were in the suburbs. And this built up a thing called the car culture, where everybody was saying, "Oh, everybody can have a car." Uh, that 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 thinking on the one hand, but then we had all this mass production during the war, where the people moved. That one-fifth, one out of every five Americans moving across the state line, and they were moving into to join the mass production. So America became very mass production, very centralized structure. The idea of big corporations mass producing, and now you throw into this transportation system across the country that all of a sudden here they're saying, "Hey, we can mass produce anything." They switched over to consumer goods after the war, and now they leveraged the transportation system to be able to distribute all over the world or all over the country initially. And that competitive, innovative thinking from the war years continued into the distribution, the manufactured distribution process after the war. And that set a very large percentage of the population into this idea that change above everything. Change is what we need. Change is better. Tomorrow's got to be different than today. So this idea of optimization, this culture of optimization, really spread among all the active parties of the population. Now, and then that led to how do we become more competitive? It was constantly how do we become more competitive, and that included here we got to reduce the costs. So as computers came along, why did they computers came along? Because people were looking for ways how can I streamline processes? How can I automate things? How can I cut the costs of producing anything? And that just continued on through all the decades since then. And AI is just the latest generation of attempts to say, how do we optimize? How do we improve over yesterday? How do we cut costs versus yesterday? How do we discover new things, better things versus yesterday? Yes, Joan.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, it's not isolated in just the optimization. The opportunity that the Americans identified was that the rest of the world was in disarray, and so the opportunity to sell was there. And once they had that market, then the optimization fed on itself because if they could provide the world with cheaper, faster, better goods, they're going to keep the market, which kept other people out of the market as well. So just to say nothing happens in just one sector.
Yeah, no, but what I think here, what it concluded is if it hadn't been for that optimization for mass production that took
No, I'm not
place in the
saying anything.
war,
Right. I
right?
think that I understand it. I'm just saying that, it wasn't just technology, it was a whole, but lots of stuff that was happening at the same time.
Yeah,
But it's very interesting.
yeah, because what happened after the war is now they recognize, hey, we've got this ability to produce everything, but we got to sell it. We got to move it. And initially, that was not so much Europe, other than the things like the Marshall Plan of saying, "Hey, that was somewhat more geopolitical to say we have to stop communism, we have to stop Russia. How can we do that? We have to rebuild up the West so we can the Western Europe so we can tie Western Europe to the U.S." objectives on that. But the main thing that that came up with was this idea that if you hadn't broken tradition, if the majority of people were continuing just to work the way they were, and you had those just whatever people were in the production industry, that it would not have significantly changed America. It was the break with tradition that resulted in most people when they looked for where they were going to live after the war, and how they were going to live, they were freed. They no longer cared or thought about where they came from. They were only looking at where they were going. How do I have my own house? Something they would never have thought about at that age that they were at if they had stayed, if the war had never happened and they had stayed in their local communities. And so we had the largest mass migration in U.S. history take place during those years. And if I look at my own family, that in the up until the around 1950, uh, we had all of my mother's aunts, uncles, and cousins all lived within a 4 block area in Brooklyn, New York, where they had lived for several generations in this small localized area. My mother went to high school. There was 11 cousins of her in the same high school at the same time. And so that was tradition. If we look by the end of the 1950s, there was only one of those 11 cousins that even lived in within an hour's drive of where the family had lived all those traditions, and that was very common during that period. So there was this great disruption in tradition, in the normal way of life and the expectations, and that was the demand of the war years to pull people into this defense industry or to send them overseas in the military. The military went from about 300 and something thousand people to over 12 million in those few years, so in about 3 years. And so between those and then those people, if they had stayed in their local communities, would have just had regular jobs. Now, many of them came back. They had officer skills, they had managerial skills. They were used to taking on big issues and big problems, and they came back with those additional skills. The ones that went into the war industry, many of them got promoted to be managers and mid-level managers in these processes to increase productivity massively during the war effort. And so now they had all this knowledge. It was there. They knew how, and they had confidence in their abilities. This was the start of something that in the early 21st century, a British journalist described as the anywhere people versus the somewhere people. This came out during the whole Brexit thing, that you had people who they defined themselves based on their profession. If they talked to anybody, they would talk about their profession, versus the somewhere people who lived in their community, stayed in their community, and they would typically define themselves as I'm from so and so, this community, because they saw themselves as part of the community. Whereas most anywhere people felt, I define myself as what I can do. I define myself as based on my skills, and I can be anywhere. I can go anywhere. And the mobility that came about because the war years required mobility. It required the ability to move mass amounts of materials and people very quickly in different places. And so you had this mobility mindset. You had all these people that had moved maybe all the way across the country, who no longer felt this tie to a particular location or the tie to the way life typically would have unfolded for them if they had stayed in their communities. And that's really important because when you take 5 years, uh, they would have evolved their lives would have evolved in a certain way in their communities, but now their lives evolved in a very different way. They never experienced what that life in the small community would have been meant for them. They never experienced that. They experienced something very different. So now they were trained to think bigger and to say, hey, those people who are the managing of these mass production facilities, who after the war were now saying, okay, people need washing machines, they need refrigerators, they need vacuum cleaners, they need all this stuff. Okay, so how do we do that? But their thinking here is big. They don't know how to think. Let's make a couple of dozen of them. We'll sell them down the street. They only can think of how do we make 10,000 of them and how do we sell them or distribute them across the whole country. And because of the road network and people moving around, and you had now new population centers that had grown up all over the country, and they needed to expand their distribution network. So this created almost like a second wave. The first wave was people moving to get involved in manufacturing and production. But now there was a wave where companies had to send people all over the country to build up their distribution networks. So it was really getting into that distribution. But of course, this fueled the housing markets in those communities and everything else. And the lifestyles, there was already the expectation, hey, we can have a house of our own in the suburbs, and we'll get a car, and that's the way we live. And so uh, their whole thinking, I get into this community, I've got to outsell all my competitors. We're not no more thinking about the enemy countries, we're thinking about the enemy competitors. And everybody is there saying, we got to be better at marketing. We got to be better at distribution. We got to cut better costs. We have to have better value propositions. And so this mindset of yesterday is not good enough anymore. We got to be better than yesterday. That was not in the tradition prior to the prior to the war was I have to be as good as. I don't have to be better. I don't have to be out there saying I've got to beat everybody else. But this competitive mindset became really ingrained in such a large percentage of the population. So then, as I say, that because that constant striving, how do we cut costs? How do we increase production? How do we improve marketing? How do we do this? How do we do that? That constant looking there, they were saying, I can cut costs if I can do this. I can cut costs. And through the 60s and 70s, I experienced that personally myself. I was in the military uh, from the mid 60s through the mid 70s. And I worked all the way up. I was at the general staff level for the logistics for an entire corps. And uh, so um, the striving at that time was how do we get more out of what we got? How do we do more with what we have? And we were just starting the automation, and every company was building their own payroll systems, their own invoicing systems, their own warehouse management systems. Everybody was out there trying to get ahead of their competitors with those tools. And then eventually they became commodities, and then you at least had to buy the best product that was out there. And this just continued on. We saw in the 80s, the 90s, how we moved from trying to build computer systems that would serve the worker to provide them with better information or to do parts of their job to starting to say, well, if we give the whole job to the computer, that we don't need the person there at all. And that person can be freed up to do something at a higher level or a higher order. But that move began, and it kept going, and it didn't change. A lot of companies kept their paper systems, for example, parallel to the automated systems up until 2008, 2009, when we had the Great Recession, and all of a sudden companies said, I got to cut costs. Well, I've been running these two parallel systems, the paper system and the automated system, all these years. Well, why? And that's when we saw the first huge cut in dropping the paper systems and just going with the automated systems fully. And now we're in the period of AI. We see the same thing happening where people are they're dabbling with the AI systems, but they're not good enough that they're going to replace their current determinative systems with AI yet. And as a result, most people are still saying, well, we're using AI to augment the existing system, to augment what the people are currently doing. But just like we saw that took place between the 80s and 2008 and 9, uh, this will eventually be more and more that I can. Why am I augmenting the human? The human's the weak link now in the system because AI is doing everything so well. Why do we have the human in the loop? And that's going to get rid of them. Anyway, I wanted to, the thing that I really wanted to get across initially was that it was this combination of breaking the disrupting the traditional chain. That was a prerequisite. If that had not taken place, we would never have seen the development in the United States that we saw. And the second thing was the strive or the need for constant optimization, constant improvement for production that the war effort required, that trained that and created that mindset. So the two mindsets, the disruption of the normal life trajectory, which you could say freed people from the sense that I need to follow the path that culture society has been following, and this infusion of this constant improvement mindset, which went from improving processes. That's in the beginning, and during the war, it was all about improving processes because that was single-minded focus, and that took place in the early years after the war because everybody was busy transitioning from war production to peacetime production. But very soon it became an idea that this constant optimization, constant improving. Oh, hey, guess what? We need to improve us. So we need more education. So the drive became I have to optimize me so that I can optimize my role and my positions in the economy. And this is where we saw a huge increase in the end of the 50s, the 1950s, into the 1960s, with the percentage of people going to universities. When I graduated from high school, very few, even though I was in the so-called more affluent high school and where I went to school, in the community I went to school in, there were very, very few students who went to college, went to universities. The majority is I'm going to get out of high school, I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to get married and have kids, and that's life. That's the way life works. But all of a sudden here, there was this big boom in that it became normal to in the last year of high school, where are you going to go to college? Where are you going to go to college? And it just exploded. So this drive to improve the processes then became the drive to improve yourself and then get back into working to improve the processes. So those were the things that drove the development in the United States and spread to the developed countries, which already had a lot of the prerequisitions to make that possible. But when we look to developing countries and we say, with all the efforts that have been going in, why have we not been able to see a parallel? I should just stop for a second and bring up China. We have to look at China because China was going along. They were one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the lowest literacy levels in the world up until around 1980. And then they had a change of policy that led to these economic zones that were intended to attract production, manufacturing, with the logic that the developed countries, in their strive, we've got to cut costs, we have to get better. Oh, hey, you know what? We can outsource and get the items built for a fraction of the cost. That's what makes sense from that optimization drive. And China was saying here, you know what? We've got a disciplined population here. We're going to strive to attract that manufacturing. And the parallel is this resulted in the biggest migration in human history of Chinese that all were attracted by demand to these manufacturing hubs on the coast. That I forget what the number was, but it's the largest migration that we've ever seen in human history that took place and disrupted. It disrupted all those lives of these people who had been living in villages all across China and doing whatever they had been doing for their normal way of life. And all of a sudden, they were yanked out and put into this very competitive environment to try to win the contracts to manufacture all this stuff. And to do that, to find ways to improve manufacturing. And if we look back over the last 40 years in China, we can say one of the things they have become the best in the world is optimizing manufacturing processes. They just continually were looking, how do we optimize? How do we make it better? How do we make it better? How do we automate? And so China today has got the manufacturing process down so far superior to every other country in the world. So, but it's the same parallel. Disrupt the lives of people's lives so that they were no longer bound by the traditions of the past and replace that with this drive, this competitive drive to optimize those same two things. So we see these in two different situations. Now, when we look to most developing countries, and we came in and we said, okay, we're going to take the cream of the crop because that was the one that was the most similar to what we had in the developed countries already. We're going to go in there and we're going to improve university graduates. We're going to create jobs for those at the top level. What we didn't do, what didn't happen, is we did not disrupt the lives of a bulk of the population. The bulk of the population continued with their lives the way they were. And so the first lesson here is it takes disrupting the lives of the majority of the people, their trajectory, where they think they want to go and where they think they're going, that is such an important part of being able to cause a country to change, to become different from what it was. And the thing that it's at the time of the disruption, there has to be this competitive opportunity for them to jump into an opportunity that causes them to be constantly wanting change, driving for improvement. Those two factors seem to be the most critical things to drive the changes, massive changes in countries. There was one more thing I want to say, but then I wanted to turn it over to you guys for comments on those two things. Oh, there's a couple of countries. You look at Singapore, you look at the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, places like that. These are very small places, and so to be able to go and declare from the top, hey, we're changing, we're doing this, we're doing that, made it possible for them to bring about the massive changes for their populations, which were very small. In Europe, it was a different situation. They already had the they had the disruption. War disrupted totally lifestyle in Europe. But they didn't have any infrastructure. All the infrastructure had been destroyed. So that whereas in the United States, it was just how do I convert my wartime production machine over to peacetime? Europe still originally had to focus on how do we rebuild our production capacity and recover from that. So they were not able to grow as fast, and it became easier for them to copy what was going on in the United States at that time. I remember one time I was in Bonn and I was taking a taxi, and the Chancellor of Germany's motorcade was coming down the road the opposite way. And the taxi driver said, "Oh, he's on his way to the American embassy to get his instructions." So that was sort of the mindset here after World War II in Europe. But for Africa, for Latin America, for South Asia, the we didn't see that catalyst combination of the disruption of the lives of the bulk of the population, combined with this driving need to be super competitive, to be looking constantly, how do we change? And having people make that success in their professions to be the driving force in their lives. Because that is another thing about it. All of a sudden here, people were working nonstop. It was no longer you worked from 8 to 5. If you were in a managerial position, you were working 24 by 7, at least in your head, if you weren't physically doing the work, and constantly striving, who's going to get that promotion? I want to get that promotion. And so there was this tremendous this whole competitive mindset that permeated the whole population. Those things have been missing in developing countries, and as a result, we've not seen the growth. That's why I held this up earlier. Some of you were not on the call at that time. This is a wristband called Dare to Be Great. It was a member of Team Vision Africa 2030. It was designed by the African youth from about 35, no, I think it was about 25 countries in Africa that came up with that, and we got a quote for 50 million of those because we said, hey, we've got to disrupt their thinking of those people to give them a different expectation for their lives, and then that expectation would drive how do we get there? What do we need to do to get there? So that they become strivers. So anyway, that's what came out. It's a lot longer than that, actually. I think I'm debating turning it into a book because I'm approaching 100 pages of all the details, and there's a lot of little details I haven't mentioned here. But I'd like to stop at this point because this is turning into just a monologue here, and the whole purpose is now to get your thoughts on what I have mentioned. So please. Yes, Joan?
I was waiting for other people to go first.
Well, somebody's got to
Um,
start.
yeah, yeah. So it's a very interesting proposition about the traditions because I think we forget traditions played such a major role in society for so long. And obviously technology with transportation and stuff like that. And Europe actually started to change in the First World War because a lot of things just didn't go their way. And as you know, I'm just writing a book about the Victory Garden in Canada. But what I discovered, I also did a lot of research on the pre 1943. That's when Canada joined the Victory Garden. So, but I wanted to know what was happening, and how much the First World War impacted the decisions of going forward. And all the traditions changed in Europe. A lot of manor houses, like the whole manor system came under things. So it was, they always say, luck is where opportunity means hard work. And the US, I think, really smartly grabbed onto that opportunity. I mean, when the Second World War ended, they had 50% of the world's wealth. 50%. And part of that was because they grabbed a lot of German soldiers, and so did the Soviets, in technology, because the Germans were the leading countries in technology. And they grabbed as many, of course, the German soldiers ran to the Americans as opposed to the Russians because of what they were going to. Well, anyway, that's history. But I mean, Germany, or German scientists and physicists, really contributed to that whole race with the Soviet Union. But we forgot that we have to bring along traditions with us. All people were concentrating on is, how do we get better in technology? How do we provide jobs? How do we, so the whole transportation, food, cultural aspects sort of became a backstage, really, to be honest. But I mean, people were concentrating on creating wealth and creating a better life. And before that, it was through the family and through the community. Now they were doing it individually.
Mhm.
And so that became the mantra.
Yeah.
So traditions, it's a very good argument.
Yeah. Actually, here we could almost say uh, you cannot advance. If there's going to be a question, some people are going to debate, is this advancing or not? I've actually had the head of a major NGO say that the worst catastrophe to ever befall humans was the invention of electricity, because that led to the light bulb, and that led to people not living by the laws of nature, of saying you get up when the sun comes up and you go to sleep when the sun goes down. And that was the beginning of the terrible situations. But if we don't go to there and we say, okay, for lifestyle, yeah, when we all lived in grass huts and whatnot and ate berries and only what we could kill ourselves, and we died when we were 40, and you had to have your kids when you were 13 so you could see them grow up. If we're saying maybe that wasn't such a great life, and some of the things that we have today are better, but it was the idea that it's either tradition or change. If you are making your primary goal in everything you do and everything you think about change just for the sake of change, change is better. We have to strive to change. And if you are in a life where you're just a cog in a wheel, or a wheel in a cog, or whatever you say on that, oh, okay, it's this is the way society works, and I just go and play my little piece, and that just rolls on. If you have that going, there's very little incentive for you to say, I'm going to break out, I'm going to be different. But if you are yanked out of that tradition, and you no longer even have a way to continue those traditions, to copy that traditions, because you're now working in an industry plant where you're being asked to work 12, 14 hours a day to and come up with a way that tomorrow that you're going to be more efficient and more productive than you were today, that changes your mindset. So that
But
tradition.
also, thank you. I'm sorry for interjecting, but this
Yes.
is a very Fascinating conversation. My name is Raj Anand. I'm an architect from India. I also write science fiction books. So AI is very interesting to me as the future of humanity. And because I'm an architect, I've traveled to China quite often over the past 20 years.
Mhm.
And I've seen the transformation of China from, let's say, a rural village sort of a scenario, quite similar to India, to, I mean, their infrastructure, is world class. I mean, it goes way beyond America.
Yeah.
And I grew up in New York. I did my schooling, my junior high school is from New York, and it's just another level.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting where tradition and modernity and the interpretation of the Chinese of modernity and tradition lies. Being a writer, one is curious. One is always traveling around China and trying to understand how did they come here. I mean, what was their mechanism? Did we lag behind, or are we just different? And I remember seeing a Google map, a world Google map at night, and there was Europe, there was US, there was India, and there was China. And it's so amazing. You can see how transformative democracy is, especially with your reference to just electricity. If you see the Google map, you can Google it today also. If you see the Google map of China at night, and if you see the Google map of US, I mean, I'm not even taking the example of US, I'm taking the example of India, because we're still, in my brain, third world. We're not there yet, although technically we are the fourth biggest economy today in the world, and will be the third biggest economy that I'm being told in the next 2 years. And I'm like, yeah, shit difference it makes to me sitting here. Uh, but it's very interesting. If you see the map of China at night on Google Maps, Google Map night, it's only the edge of China, the eastern coast of China, which is lit up. And if you see India, and the reason I'm mentioning India is because we're still way behind China economically in terms of the scale, PPP, many other economic models. Uh, it's much more democratic. The cities are lit up, the villages are lit up, the small towns are lit up, because we're a democratic society. We cannot say no to a constituency. When I say we, I'm not a politician, but a politician cannot say no. So he will work at a micro level and take care of his constituency. Whereas in China, uh, they're so focused, I mean, crazy focused on progress and on production and how many containers I want to buy. It's all along the coast where they can sell. But if you see the inner part of China, you see Tibet, you see Xinjiang, you see the inner part of China, it's dark. It's pitch dark. They might be the second biggest economy in the world, but it's pitch dark. And you're like, what the hell are you people doing, man? And, I remember once I was in a town called Hangzhou, and I was very curious about a particular philosopher, a Taoist philosopher called Master Ji Hong. And his temple was there. So I was there for work, and I was like, look, I'm very curious to go to his temple. He's amazing, because Master Ji Hong had brought together Taoism and Confucianism, and he had written a treatise, a very famous book, where he brings both the traditions together and says one is not enough. You have to combine both the ideas and the philosophical concepts and take them forward. And nobody knew. It took me 3 days to find the temple. Nobody had a clue. And finally, one guy said, there is some, because I kept on telling them it's next to this lake. It's next to this lake. And they said, well, yeah, I think we know the lake you're talking about, but there's no temple there. I was like, take me to the lake. So they took me to the lake, and I'm just walking around the lake. It's a ginormous lake. It's a huge lake. And then I was with somebody who was interpreting for me, because nobody speaks English in China. And somebody pointed to a mountain and said, yeah, there is a temple up there. And I finally walked up the mountain, and that was Master Jihon's temple. And there were people there who were worshipping, because slowly over the past 10, 15 years, the Chinese government has allowed a little bit of religious freedom. So Christianity, Buddhism has flourished, in fact, in the past 15 years. Today, I can find Buddhist restaurants, Buddhist temples all across China whenever I travel. And the reason I point out Buddhist restaurants is because they're completely vegan. So it's very easy to order there because I don't give a damn. Whatever is there in the photograph, I can point to any two things and I know I'm safe. So I can get anything there and it's completely vegan. So I'm always looking for Buddhist restaurants. And because I'm severely allergic to shellfish, so I'm always nervous ordering in a Chinese restaurant because I don't know what dish has shellfish and I'll die right there. And so even when I went up the mountain, I sat there. It was a beautiful, beautiful temple. I mean, the temple I know from my readings of Master Ji Hong is over 1,500 years old. And in fact, Master Ji Hong is considered the father of Chinese medicine, or one of the founders, if not the founder. And I may be wrong about that. So, I mean, I'm sure he was one of the founders. That's for sure. I've done my research. But it was so interesting walking around the temple. There were people who were going, paying their obeisance, paying their respect to his huge statue and a beautiful, peaceful mountain and a place. And I started asking them, I said, so what do you know about Master Ji Hong? So most of the people said, well, we don't know who he is. We know that he's a ethereal person in our history, but we don't know who he is. No, we're not taught about him in our schools. So we just come here. It's a nice place to go for an early morning walk. We light a candle there. We put a little, fragrance there and put some flowers there. But we really don't know who he is. And that's true for China because the Chinese, as much as I've understood and I've spoken to the Chinese over the past 20 years while I've gone there for work, and I may have made over 50 visits in the past 20 years, is that their history begins with Mao Zedong. And before that, it's 2,000 years of insults. They consider it as the dark era, where the Britishers and the Americans and the Portuguese and the French and the Mongols and everybody else invaded China, so they don't want to talk about it. So if you ask a Chinese person about their history, about the Mongols, and they don't know anything. They just look at you stumped like, what are you talking about? And because for them, history starts with Mao Zedong. And if you look at the progress of China, they're very, if you really do a little bit of research on their politicians, they're all mathematicians, they're all engineers, they're all physicists. They have zero understanding of humanity. They have zero understanding of culture, and they don't even want to. They have zero understanding at a micro level that these people are suffering. I need to help them because I'm an elected official, because they're not an elected official. They cannot be kicked out of the party. By giving enough money, they can rise up the ranks, or pissing off somebody, they can be thrown out of the party. But they're not answerable to anybody. So they're all result-oriented politicians. It's all about how many roads did you build? How many buildings did you build?
And how many people did you lift out of poverty?
Yes. How
Poverty
many
managers.
railroads did you build? How many airports it's all infrastructure. And if you sit with anybody, that's all they want to talk about. And I'm like, yesterday I was in Guangzhou once, and I was staying in a hotel. Just across from me, there were these old buildings, and I'm an architect. I was so fascinated. They're so beautiful. Old Chinese architecture, and everything else was so modern, contemporary, mixed use, tall 40-story buildings and housing and huge malls and massive highways. And I found a river, and along the river it was beautifully landscaped. There were gardens, people were practicing, doing their Tai Chi in the morning and all that. It was beautiful, and I was doing Tai Chi with them. But I was there for 7 days, and on the fourth day, I see these JCBs come in, and they're breaking down all those old Chinese buildings. And I'm like, what are you people doing? And I asked the hotel guy, I was like, why are they breaking it? He's like, yeah, there's some mixed use coming. There are 2 hotels coming there. So I was like, what happens to the people? They're like, they've been shifted. Then they'll be given an apartment within that complex 5 years from now. Right? So it's so, they have, what do the horses wear? They just have those on, and they just want to go there. It's as if nothing else existed in the past. And being in India, I may be wrong, but I would say about 80% of the politicians are not engineers. They're more social workers. They've political science. They've studied in the universities. They've studied Indian history. They've studied Indian languages. And most of the politicians are at a very local level. They belong to that village. They belong to that state. They belong to that town. And that's how they come up, in the democratic system. They win elections, and then they go back and they're answerable to their people, otherwise they won't win the next election. So they make sure the local small villages are built and they're lighted up, and the water pumps are given to the farmers and all that. And you can see that on Google Maps. And it's so fascinating as a dichotomy between two cultures, and ancient cultures, 5,000, 6,000 year old cultures, and how they're progressing in such a different fashion. And people criticize India that we are so behind. But I'm like, yeah, we are behind, but we're taking everybody together with us. We're not segregating society on the East Coast, because that's where all the exports happen.
I think here it's very interesting, and thank you so much for bringing your experiences on that. I had similar experience. I traveled about 10 years ago. I backpacked. Well, my wife and I we quasi backpacked around China for more than a month, visiting 11 different cities in China, and staying in youth host staying in hostels rather than hotels, and spending time wandering in the hutongs and this and when you mentioned Hangzhou, the lake, and all these places. I've been to a lot of these, Guangzhou and Chengdu. The interesting thing here is that the movement, this largest migration of humans in history, that took place in China, that pulled all those population from the inner parts of China to the coast. Because you're correct, because the coast enabled the export. That was
Yes.
before the infrastructure. The first part of infrastructure that China did was in education, expanding education, healthcare into communities. That's when we were into the barefoot doctors and teachers and stuff like this, that movement. But nothing really developed much until they changed the policy Chow Enlai and um, Deng
Deng
and
Xiaoping.
Deng Xiaoping,
Yes.
and said, "Hey, we're releasing people.
Yep.
They can
Yes.
pursue their own advancement, and the opportunities were there initially on the coast. So it pulled huge numbers. I think in excess of 40 million people migrated in a very short time to these coasts and built up all this. That was the equivalent of what in the United States." That pulled the migration into places like Detroit, and places like California, that was the aircraft manufacturing at the time and the shipbuilding, that California's population doubled in just a couple of years as a result of all that migration. So you could say it was the same thing in the US. We destroyed the culture and the tradition of the cities as a necessity to be able to get to this mass production and this striver mentality, that you had to strive first for patriotism to build a war machine, but later on to your company, you had the same loyalty competition spirit from company to company. And as you saw in China, that took place in the 1980s when everything went to the coast and built up in the coast. And to where we're at now, we see just last week, I forget who it was that was describing. I think it was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was describing that China now has the first hospital where there's no humans working. It's all just machines and AI.
Yeah,
Now,
yes.
what you were describing here, Raj, on the idea of where's the humanity? Okay, well, you could say, where's the humanity of saying we're going to displace all humans? Because that's where we're on the way to. The AI the AI initially, it's going to augment humans and enable us to do things. We already see, we have a lot of times in this call, I don't see him yet on this call, Ashok Patel from the Mayo Clinic, who they just had a big breakthrough in discovering a way to detect pancreatic cancer and a promising treatment for that that came up in a very short time because of AI. But so we can say probably AI is on the route. It's going to replace all human jobs. So the idea that we're going to have humans are going to have jobs that have income, it's only a matter of time. That's not going to be the case, and we're going to have to find something else. It's just like that woman from Core Congress of Racial Equality was telling me back here several decades ago that it's too bad that we had to come up with electricity. And I have a lot of young people who travel and they say, oh, they were living with Aborigines in Australia or in people in different parts of Africa. And she said, these people have nothing. They're totally poor, but they're happy. And so the question is, she concluded, what right do we have to come and tell these people that you have to modernize and have all this stress in your life and so forth when they're happy the way they are? And but at the same time, they're dying at a huge rate. The death toll, the maternity death toll is very high, but that's they just accept that's the way it is. That's just normal.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a interesting discussion and debate, and I don't think we should gloss over it. I do think we need to talk about it, but we have a basic conflict that tradition is it has an inertia. There's an inertia to the path of tradition. In Taoism, I went and visited Taoist temples as well when I was in China because it's a philosophy that I also think highly of. I'm very interested in philosophy, the Upanishads and Taoism and so forth. But that tradition that says this is the way our life works, that is in conflict with the idea of we have to change. We have to beat everybody else. We're in a constant competition because that's what took root in the United States in the 40s and then continued on from there on out. And when we think you go to university, 80% of students at American universities are there to improve their competitive position to get high-powered jobs or to get promotions and so forth. And the competition within companies, and companies encourage it. They encourage that you look at every one of your work colleagues and think they're a competitor. You've got to outperform them. And so we had, for example, the CEO of General Electric a couple of decades ago, very famous, who
Jack.
came out, yeah,
Uh,
Jack Welch, and
Jack.
came out and said, okay, every year you get rid of the bottom 5% or 10% here. So you don't want to be in that lower 5 or 10%. Imagine what it would do for education if we just came out and said every year we're going to go and take the most effective 5% of every class and we're going to take them down to the river and drown them. You're not going to want to be in that bottom 5%. Boy, are you going to become a striver. And so it's this kind of mindset. Is that good? That's something we could have a huge debate on, but it's a little different than looking and saying, well, wait a minute, those things, that striver mentality, that competitive sense here is what has caused many Americans, at least up until the last 20, 30 years ago, many Americans to have a much better lifestyle than they would have previously had. We could also argue that in the last 20, 30 years,
I
it's
answer.
actually,
I'm sorry. Interjecting, but I'll forget my
yeah,
my thought
go ahead,
train.
go ahead.
My apologies if I'm.
And no, but I just want to encourage everybody else, do the same. Paul, you've got your hand up here.
Please, somebody
Just
wants to
jump in.
welcome. Yes, please. I was in Ladakh, which is in North India. It's a part of Kashmir, the disputed zone, if it's called. So Ladakh is non-Muslim. It's primarily Buddhist, and it's It's like the Chilean desert where all the telescopes are there and all that, because it's completely dry. So it's perfect for these huge telescopes to look out into the universe. In fact, India also has a very big observatory there, and it's a dry desert, but it's up high up in the mountains. It's about 15,000, I don't know, 10,000 feet high. So oxygen levels are very low. So when you go there for 2 days, they tell you to just chill in a hotel, because your lungs and your brain has to get used to the fact that the oxygen levels are much lesser. And it's full of Buddhist monasteries. And in fact, one of the Buddhist monasteries, me and about 14 architects, we stayed there for 3 months, and we were studying the monastery, documenting the monastery. And the monastery is 1,500 years old. Okay, it's made out of mud. Okay, fine. Yeah, and it's 7 stories high, 7 floors high. And okay, fine. The ground floor is 30 feet wide, the walls, and it tapers to about 10 feet or 11 feet or something, because that's how they used to structurally support their temples. And it just gives you a sense of how small you are in the history of this on the planet, history of humanity, and history of the universe. I mean, America is what, less than 300 years old, approximately. And when you see that monastery made out of mud and it's just standing there, there's nothing wrong with it, 1,500 years. And it's like, oh my God. I mean, we start, jumping up and down because we miss the next update from Apple or something on our iPads or something. Like, chill out, man. Chill out for a moment. And if you really study the economy of in world history, uh, what I read was for the past 5,000 years, India and China were about 80%, 75 to 80% of the world economy for about 4.5 or 4,700 years or 4,600 years out of that 5,100 years. India and China were the biggest economies in the world. Their GDP occupied 75 to about, let's say, 75% of the world economy for over 4,500 years. And the lesson that a little research paper that I was reading said, you can't keep these countries down for a long time. You may do it for a couple of 100 years, you might do it for 300-400 years, but it's not possible to do it for a because it's ingrained into them to work hard, to progress forward and all that. Yes, the Britishers came, they occupied us for 250 years and did a lot of nonsense, a lot of nonsense. I'm sorry, I don't know if somebody wants to pitch in, please pitch in. I have a lot of stories. Once I was in
Yeah,
China.
let me allow to, please, Raj.
Please,
I want to
please.
share what I have, because as the what we are discussing is this, that most of the world, why not follow the prosperity model of China? So let's talk in my way, or what I have learned, because I'm doing with them for business with them. I'm going there from 1998, which is 27 years, and I have seen their development. That they, at time before 2000, there was Bill, there was more than thousands and thousands more bicycles at that time. Before 2000, if we just stand in Shanghai at any signal, so, and there were very few cars. But now we are talking about, if we are talking about just few years back up to 2020, there were hardly, you will find any bicycle there. So that thing shows how they develop, how their economy develops. So as a matter of fact, being an entrepreneur, being an industrialist, I learned from them that they always, they what their development, especially in the industry, in the economy, that was their development was based on the reverse engineering. They buy two plants at one time. One, they go for themselves to use it, and second is, and if we are talking about China development, so no doubt in it that that is a unique model, especially their history, their resources, their the best. What I personally feel, maybe it doesn't suit the developed world, but what they have done, they have a different style of ruling their people. How they rule, how they do today, they pitch in one thing in the mind of every Chinese, that if you do wrong, you cannot go away. That's the thing. Very sorry to say, if we talk about even the developed world, or India, Pakistan, or the third world countries, we start with a negative feeling for the development. And everybody wants a overnight development. And within the overnight, they want to get everything. But while talking about them, they got their own development with their own style, with their own way. That's what it is. So what I have seen is that then on the other hand, while talking with any person, like a friend of mine, he started just, 10 years back or 15, 10 to 12 years back. Today, he is exporting to 70 different countries all over the world. And when I saw his machines, they are working like unbelievable production. And one thing more, which I must share with these, that today's China is not that, as Brother Raj said, that if you go there, just see their railway station and their trains running at 350 kilometers per hour. That's amazing development. If we talk about how can the other countries follow them, so it's not easy. I personally feel that they started with such a dedication. Their leaders, I must say, they are dedicated one. And on the other hand, that the China leaders are always work within the bracket. They cannot go beyond the bracket. And there is the example of the one sitting minister. They shoot him in front of the people because his corruption was proved. So this is what it is. They don't believe in compromising anything. On the other hand, whatever they produce, their basic market was available there. It was about 2 billion people, 1.75 billion or 2 billion people are there. If they are producing anything, so first they have the internal market, then this thing, and then on the other hand, if we talk about their development of any types, like they are developing in every field. It's not only the roads, it's not only the railway line, it's not only the aircraft, like they got the biggest fleet in the aircraft as well. So on the other hand, they believe in this, that we have to produce everything by ourselves. Then let's move on. What they are doing, as a matter of fact, regarding this Built and Road Initiative, B&RI, they were knowing this thing, that the world is going to change very fastly, and there would be many opponents. When they produce many things, there will be very hurdles. So what they do, they spend billions and billions of dollars for this BRI project. And especially for Pakistan, they started doing for the CPAC. CPAC was really something which changed our country as well. But they are getting benefit for them. Like for this upper part, my brother said that yes, no doubt in it, that they shift their people from one place to another just for a purpose, and they always move in the cluster. Just sharing with you, one time I go there, I saw a chemical, what they said, it's a chemical garden. Yes, that's the name, which is in the center. And when I saw there, hundreds and hundreds of projects were there to produce the chemicals, and that become they put it the name chemical garden. They control now today. One last example, and then I'll quit. That just with one order of their Supreme Court, they close hundreds and hundreds project based on wood production, like chipboard, plywood, drywall, MDF. They close all the projects. But on the other hand, they compensate all the industries, and now all the industries are shift to polymer and this WPC and PVC. So they know how to do, what to do, and especially their development is in cluster base. Not only the industry, their education system, their universities, they are developing themselves in specific fields. That's what it is. So I must conclude with this, that no doubt in it that they developed themselves in all the fields. It's not easy to follow them, but whosoever is going to take the steps, which is not easy for my country, at least I know we tried. They want to give us a lot many things, but we don't know how to take. So that's where it is. But on the other hand, they need the country like Pakistan, like other countries who got My friend said about Ladakh, he go there. I don't know, but I know the situation there, what they do. On the other hand, now their nation, their people, they are coming on the religion. I have seen 25 years, 27 years back when I go there, there were hardly people who were in the religion. The old age people, the senior people were there, but their youth was not. Today, they all are coming to the religion as well. Over to you, sir.
Yes,
Well,
actually,
my
very,
submission would be
yeah.
that we have to look at it from a historical perspective of not 25, 30 years, 40 years. Any totalitarian state, whether it's Germany, Hitler, Mussolini, everybody will progress in the short period because it's a totalitarian state. I remember Fareed Zakaria on CNN once saying that it would be great if the US can be for 1 month China and 11 months be America. So I thought that was really funny because the way decisions are taken, it doesn't go through a democratic process. And just because China has progressed so much in the past 30, 40 years doesn't make it right from a historical long term perspective. There are many things wrong with China. I have a lot of friends in China, and most of them are boys because historically, even in the Asian subcontinent, boys have been preferred. Historically, I'm talking about. So there in China also, boys are preferred. So when for a long time China had a one-child policy, so if a
Yeah.
girl child was born, she would be her throat would be slit because everybody wanted a boy. And today there's such a huge issue that the percentage of boys to girls is so high in China that they can't find girls to marry. So they have to go to Vietnam, they have to go to Laos and Cambodia and other places to buy wives. So it's not so simplistic to say just because they have factories that they have progressed. Life is much more than about money. It's about happiness, like Bill said. And if the community in Australia, the Aborigines are happy without electricity, it says a lot about what are we striving for. It does say a lot.
Yeah, I'd like
But
to
I
add.
think that,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
Go
Yeah, I
ahead,
just
Joe.
want to say that the whole thing of the divide, of saying that there are developed countries and third world countries, it's such a put down statement. It's all about the money.
Absolutely, absolutely. Completely with
Like who came, I always say, how come a third world country is like China and India? They've been around for how long? They
5,000.
ran, yeah, exactly. They're merchants at heart, they're merchants. We had people say, "Oh, Arabs are this and that," and I said, "Well, they ran the Silk Road for thousands of years. Like,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
built
Yeah.
libraries. Like, what are you talking about?" Because it's all about recognizing what the West has done, particularly America. And like China even said it. I think it was earlier this summer. It could have been last year, because I listened to too many things. And the US was trying to bulldoze them into doing something. And China, basically, the representative says, we've been here for 4,500 years. You've been
Yep,
only around for 200 years. Like, what
yep.
are you talking? We're going to be here when you're gone, you know, economically. Now, we don't want to see that happen. I'm not purporting that. But stop saying that we're the best and we're the most optimized and stuff. Look at what we can work, how we can work together. Like China has, if you look at geopolitics, for example, America went into the Middle East because they wanted the oil, because that's what drives their, the money
Economy.
and the
Yeah.
oil and the all of that, and created, well, with the British started it. Let's not get the British involved here, because then we'll be here forever. So they went into oil and gas and, creating unstable situation and supporting with the religion on the, well, forget the religion. But what did China do? China went into Africa. And you know what they did? They did community outreach, work with the local communities. What do you need? Oh, we need transportation. We need this. They didn't go in and say, we've got $100 billion US aid thing. Oh, we have a project. What's the project? And it employs US people. Like, how is that aid?
Yeah.
No,
You
no,
know?
but the
So
Chinese also employ only Chinese people. And
Well,
only
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, no, don't
Otherwise, that
even
is
think that
not
they
all of
exploit
them, not the
anybody
Yeah.
locally.
project.
It's
But
all
one,
Chinese companies, Chinese people, nothing local is used except the bill is
cannot.
sent to the local government
yeah.
that you have to pay this with 10 to 15 to 20% interest annually.
Yeah. One thing we have to be very careful on all these discussions is when we think and say, okay, China is so many thousands of years, India is so many thousands of years. We have to think the countries, the way we think of countries today, we can't think of them the same way. China during that year was how many different empires, how many different things. India the same way, or even today, India, the states are very powerful because of that democratic aspect that you're mentioning. So we have to be very
No,
careful
the
about
only
time.
point, yeah, the only point I was trying to make is that I get distressed when I hear developed world and under because
No,
we don't
you're
recognize the history
correct.
that's there. That's
Yeah.
all
You
the
know,
point I was trying to make.
I can I just share a small story. Richard Feynman was a very famous physicist, one of my heroes. He was part of the Manhattan Project, a great physicist. He propounded many theories which actually came out true. Um, he was traveling in South America. I won't name the country, the region, but he was traveling around, and he was there for a conference. And one day he was free, and so he just hired a local taxi and said, "Take me around. I just want to see the country. I've never been here. It's my first time." So, and it's in a book. I have it, in fact, at my bag somewhere. Great writer also. So he's the guy's taking him around, and they're talking about life and culture and economics, and at a very basic level. The guy's a taxi driver, and they're joking, and he was a big jokester and all that. Also, Richard Feynman, a very smart guy. So he goes, I've been with you for the past 3 4 hours. Can I take you to a particular place? This some place has really puzzled me, and I don't have an answer to that. I don't understand it. He said, sure, I'm free. I'm with you for the whole day. So he takes him to a little shanty town, and he says, you see that shanty town? It's all made out of metal and wood, and basic houses, and there's no sanitation and all that. This has been there for the past 50, 60 years since the Britishers left us. And you see those two shanties next to each other. So Richard Feynman goes, yeah. So he goes, on the left, and I'm not, please, my apologies, I'm not trying to push up any particular culture or anything. I'm just sharing a story from Richard Feynman's book. So he says, on the left is a small house owned by an Indian family, and they've been here for the past whatever 100 years since the Britishers brought them here for sugar plantations. And on the right is another family. So he said, I grew up next to that house, and the Indian family, that they have 3 kids. All three are doctors in the US. And on the right, they have 3 kids, and 2 of them are in prison, and one of them is, jobless. How does that happen? How does that happen? And I'm apologizing again. I'm just sharing Richard Feynman's story. I'm not putting my subset of a lens on it. And Richard Feynman he goes, I didn't want to talk to him about it, but in my heart, I was trying to tell him that, look, when you have a culture of 5,000 years, and this is important to understand, it's not about, when you have a culture of 5,000 years, there are certain things that become naturally, integrally part of who we are, whether it's the Upanishads or Vedas or whatever and all that. There are negatives also about it. I'm not saying it's all good, but he said, they've come from a culture of 5,000 years of learning and education. You can't pull it out of their genes. They're just bred like that. They're just like that. It's integral to their way of life. And how do you explain that to someone? So Richard is like, I didn't feel like explaining it, so I said, I don't know, and I said, let's move on. Let's see another part of the city. So my point that I'm trying to make is that it does make a difference. Culture matters. And culture of any part of the world matters, whether it's Japanese or European or Russian or African. And Africa is one of the most understudied cultures in the world historically, and because it's just misunderstood. We don't understand their basic connect with nature and the basic reason for the Aborigines' happiness. We're just so lost in this conversation about GDP that we think that's the win all, and it's not the win all. It's not where happiness lies.
I'd like to just add a couple of points to what a number of you have said, and then I would like to move on. I'll explain why in a second. Just a couple of observations was made about the idea that in China it all began as reverse engineering or copying what was done. I remember in the 1950s, Japan, post-war
Yeah.
Japan. The thing that we all thought of post-war Japan was selling cheap plastic kitchen bowls and cheap tin toys, little airplanes and things, toys. And then they got into optics and electronics and cars and things like this. So yes, they started off copying and then they became some of the best in certain technologies. If we look at China, we can sort of say the same thing. Yes, they started off reverse engineering here, but if you want to buy the best phones in the world right now, you're going to get a Xiaomi or a Huawei or
Yep.
something else.
Yep.
The same thing with the transmission technology with Huawei versus Cisco, let's say here in the U.S. Yes, it sort of began that way. The another thing here was this idea of with the idea that countries copy and make. The U.S. is no different in that. Then, in fact, here if we think Germany, oh, that's a high-tech country, made in Germany. That means something, right? Well, why is made in German in English? Why isn't saying gemacht in Deutschland or hergestellt in Deutschland? And the reason is because made in Germany was something the English insisted so people could identify low quality copies. Because Germany was initially known as a country that made low quality copies of locks in particular. That era was locks and clocks and things like this that they were copying other people. Another point here is with regards to the demo. Well, let's start with the churches. One of the things that really blew my mind when I was there in China, going around China, was the number of mosques and churches and how well they were populated on a Sunday when you went by a Christian church. It was amazing the people standing outside on the lawn. And
Which year was this? Which year was this?
this would have been in 2016.
Yeah. So
20,
when I went there for the first time in 2006, between 2006 and 2012, there was nothing.
yeah,
There was nothing.
right.
And then they slowly let it loose, started
And
loosening up.
And the same thing with mosques. For example, in Xi'an, Xi'an has an entire Muslim quarter
Yes. Yes.
that has a huge mosque, and we visited the mosque and we talked to people here. And the interesting thing is with regards to people and the discipline and the lack of democracy or freedom, especially in the United States, we like to say, "Oh, China's a country with no freedoms." And we took night trains. We took the night trains traveling around the country, going from city to city. And so Chinese love to talk. Okay, they can't speak English. What do they have? They've got instant
Interpret.
translation everywhere we went. Even if we were in one train station sitting there and we were discussing here how we were going to get to this other particular town where we would have to change the train and whatnot. And people were coming up to us and saying, okay, how do we help? Heng Zhao, one of the guys from what's the big company in
Yeah, yeah,
Hangzhou?
yeah. The
Alibaba. Ali,
Alibaba. That's the
Alibaba, yeah. So we had a guy comes up. It turns out he was an executive at Alibaba here, and he's explaining to us about Hangzhou and so. But the interesting thing was all those people that loved, they wanted to talk to us like crazy on the night trains, and we say nobody complains, nobody's going to criticize. Wow, I'll tell you, we got an earful on the trains. What did they complain about? Well, China wasn't doing enough to protect history and protect culture. China, it was amazing. And the other thing is, I sought out. I was active at the UN, and I was the vice chair of the NGO Committee for Education, Learning, and Literacy. And I had built up some international business situations, and I'm very interested in young people. So we had a lot of, and whenever we got the opportunity, we were in a restaurant or whatnot, and there was somebody maybe in their 20s or late teens sitting on a table next to me, and I would start to talk because that generation does speak English to a large degree. And it was amazing how they were telling me that the Chinese government encourages young people to spend at least a year overseas to watch and see what are people doing in other parts of the world and bring that back and try to replicate the things they think are good versus what they think is not so good. And a English teacher from Arizona actually spent time in India and China and comparing it to the education systems in the US. And for example, one of these things he said was in both India and China, if you went to a number of students, let's say upper middle school or beginning of high school, and you ask them what they want to be, they have very clear and very high ambitions of what they want to be. Whereas in the US, most of them are just, hey, I don't want to think about that type of thing.
Vocational studies. They want to do vocational studies.
What he saw, yes, what
No,
he's,
not engineers.
Oh
Vocational.
my God, come
no,
on.
actually in India here, the people that he had on his interview, he had recorded them
No,
almost
no. I'm
all.
talking about the US. I'm talking about the US. I'm so
Oh, in the
sorry.
US,
To
yeah.
the country.
The
Oh,
US right now, they're driving for that. But anyway, I wanted to point out that the young people, they were amazingly aware of all the political situations, all the kinds of discussions at the UN. I never experienced such a high percentage of young people. Now, because these were the young people who spoke English, maybe I don't know, but the I never experienced so many young people who
You
were
talking about
so
China or
in
India now?
China, in China.
Okay.
Never experienced so many young people, and this was in Chengdu, this was in Lian, this was in pretty much across the board.
mm,
The education system here, the OECD does every 3 years. They compare the education outcomes of all the leading countries in the world. For the past several decades, well, at least in the about I looked at it about 6 years ago when I was looking at it. China was so far ahead of this. They were more than 10% better than the second place country in the world. The level of striving, the level of innovation. And that teacher who had traveled around asking the kids what they wanted to be and so forth, one of the other things he did is he found in China was the amount of experimentation being done in schools where they would go to these international conferences and they would go and find, or they would even hire teachers from Europe and other parts of the world in North America, come to China and they would try out different things in different experimental schools. And when they found something that worked better than whatever they were doing, they would switch. And these are part of the things that have contributed to the very high level of education that we see in China. The other is that striver mentality, because, and we see the same in South Korea, because it's to get into top schools, the best schools, is very competitive, and you just can't buy your way into most of those schools. So that the striving here to get accepted into certain schools was very high. Another thing is on gender equality. One of the things that we saw, and I have friends in China that are basically confirmed the same thing, the amount of women executives and women business owners, especially in technology, is amazing. I've met with some of these self-made women multi-millionaire women who have built up technology companies, much higher percent that I saw anywhere in Europe or in the United States. So right now, I feel I don't believe that mindset for boys. Well, first of all, they relaxed the one-child policy, but I think in general here it's the gender gap because, as you said, in China it's all about results, results, results. If you can show you can bring results, you're going to get ahead. It's really a meritocracy.
I agree with
Sorry,
what
Bill.
a lot of
Sorry, Raja. I just want to say I have to go, but I really love this conversation.
okay,
So you're going to
sure,
send
sure.
out the
Yes.
yeah,
Okay, will
and
do.
I need to talk to you regarding SIFA at some
Oh,
point.
okay. Yes.
Okay. Sorry,
Yep.
Okay,
guys.
bye.
Okay.
Bye. Take care.
Bye, John.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for being here.
I'm an ex-professor of architecture. I taught for 16 years. I taught over 2,500 kids across 3 universities. And going to China, what you're saying is absolutely correct because, my interpretation of talking to the kids there in companies, wherever I went, regarding construction and furniture and materials was, they're so focused on production. They're so focused on the economy. They're so focused on progress because it's a monovision, and that's where they want to go. If you want to talk to them, it's like going out with a friend who only wants to talk about his business, and it's so irritating. It's like, man, there's something else in life also. And it's with them it's like that because they don't want a lot of political issues, at least as much as I tried to probe them, they were very touchy. It's like, we don't want to discuss it, we don't want to discuss this, we don't want to discuss this, we don't want to discuss this. This is touchy topic, Raj. Lay off because once
Actually,
you're
here's
sitting,
yeah, that matches what I mentioned here about the comments that were made about that they were talking about how the government was paying for the upkeep and for the repair of the churches and mosques, that the government was paying for that. And they were appreciative, but they said we need to do more to preserve some of the historical, especially the hutongs, as you mentioned this drive to tear down certain areas in the hutongs and put up
yes,
modern
yes.
buildings and things like that. What really surprised me was the number of 20, 30-story buildings that were being torn down. Because in the first years of the 1980s, 90s, the buildings, the goal was just build, build, build. And the quality was the emphasis was not on the quality. Right now, all the buildings that are being built, you have to show you have the zero carbon footprint, and they're really, really paying a lot of attention to that. So if your building was very energy wasteful and the quality not so good, they're tearing down these things that to us look like perfectly good buildings, just so they could build a building that met the requirements better.
Culturally, it's so interesting how China and Japan is. I've taken my students to Japan several times. Architectural students,
Mhm.
and I remember this story that a professor there was telling us. He said, uh, we are culturally, yes, we've been a very vicious society. Beheadings and taking over other countries, and they have a very, very vicious past. And I mean, some of the things you hear, my God, shocks the hell out of you. And so he's like, there was an American guy who he was very senior in a company who was hired in Japan. So he was given a choice of houses to rent. So he finally picked a house, and the outside was, full of ivy and moss, and there was some fungi growing on it and all that. And he was like, "How terrible!" And he painted the whole house, got the whole house painted from the outside. And he's standing there outside, admiring the fact that he got the whole house painted. And there's an old lady who walks up to him. She goes, "What are you looking at?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm looking at the repainted house." So her response was, "Don't worry about it. In 30 years, it'll come back to its natural state. It's very sad what has been done to this place." So Japan is very low key, very quiet. Culturally, they're not very loud, but they're very attentive to their details. You walk into a pastry shop in Japan, my God, their attention to detail, how the cream layers are, and how the paper, and how each and every small element is combined to put together this pastry. My God, it was the most delicious thing I've ever had. I was just shocked by the detailing. And in China, and I'm not talking about 10 years from now, I would go to Guangzhou and I would go to Shanghai and you would see these, round donut shaped buildings and these gold plated buildings, and they don't know when to stop. I mean, Donald Trump would have a lot of fun there.
Um, the another thing here, you mentioned about the bikes, and I don't know here because it's like I say, it's almost 10 years since I was there. But when I was there, the bikes were everywhere, and they were the e-bikes. That was
Yes.
way before the West was thinking about e-bikes. In China, they were everywhere. And to conserve the battery power, the e-bikes were the most dangerous things on the road in the evenings because everybody would turn their lights off to preserve their batteries, and you can't hear them. And trying to cross the street is taking your life in your own hands. So, I
You
think, yeah,
Last time I was in Hangzhou, I was in just before COVID hit, 2019. And there were, I mean, I was there in 2017, then I went back in 2019 for work. And in 2017, there were bikes everywhere. They were parked. There were a lot of companies who had started, these e-biking companies. So the bikes were parked in a particular slot. You could just swipe your QR code from your phone and take the bike and, travel to the other part of
yeah.
the city, park it there and all that. I went back in 2019 and all the bikes, it was a disaster. I mean, they were thrown everywhere. And I'm like, what the hell happened? They were so organized 2 years ago. They said, oh, that was a nightmare. Nobody uses the bikes anymore. Bikes were being stolen, the tires were being stolen, and all these things happened. And then they realized the model doesn't work because everybody has a car. So they didn't really think through their business model. And now all the bikes are thrown everywhere. The government of Hangzhou doesn't know what to do with them. It's a disaster. It's a nightmare. The whole
Mm.
project was a disaster.
Ah. Well,
Everybody's so hard on it.
I think one of the things, so Hangzhou built a tremendous metropolitan transit system. They were just
Yes.
finishing it when I was there, so I think that replaces a lot of the bike traffic, as if you
Yes.
can, have mobility around. Okay, one last thing here, and that is getting back to the democracy situation versus the top-down planning, if you would. And I mentioned about one of the things China, we all recognize when the UN comes out and says, hey, look at how many people we've removed from extreme poverty. Look at all the people that we've removed from hunger. Well, if you take China out of the mix, the world doesn't look so good. And that China had this policy of the bureaucracy. There were poverty managers in every community whose job it was to figure out how to lift the population that was in poverty or extreme poverty out of poverty. One of the things that they realized was that a lot of those remote villages, one of the reasons why you see the lights at night being more concentrated in China is China realized that people that were living in remote areas without infrastructure, maybe mountains, kids having to walk 3 hours a day to get to school, things like this, that this was untenable. And the issue came here to say, how do we provide the infrastructure, whether it's healthcare, education, whatever, to all these remote areas? We can't do that. They can't afford to, those communities can't afford to pay for it. And it's unfair for us to ask the people who are in the urban areas, the more urban suburban areas, to pay for that. So China engaged in a policy of relocating huge numbers of people from these hard to support remote areas. But it was and in the West, we sort of said, oh, that forced migration here, that is so evil. But when I dug into it a little further, what I found with the typical way that China did it is they created a new regional city, if you would, and then they would take people from maybe 20 outlying remote areas that were difficult to support, and they would invite them to come and spend a week living in this new community that had been built. And they had done it in a way so that within a neighborhood, everybody that had lived in this village would spend the time in this particular neighborhood. It was sort of like what in the United States people do with the time sharing. Time sharing is when you go and say, okay, I'm gonna buy 2 weeks a year at a resort. and so you pay for that share of the of the resort, and you own those 2 weeks type of thing. But to get people to do that, they invite you to come down, spend a week at the resort, and you get wined and dined, and you're gonna love it. And that's their sales tactic. Well, China did the same thing. They invited all the people, hey, come on down here, spend a week in living in this, and you've got running water, you've got electricity, you've got TV sets, you've got internet here, you have all these amenities there. And then, but at the end of the time, what they found was almost all the older people said, thank you very much. Now we're going home. The
Yeah.
problem is their kids didn't. The younger generation said, "Oh, wow, yes, we love this. We can build on this." And the younger generation mostly stayed in the new communities because not only did they build the buildings and whatnot, but they created the job opportunities and things like that. So the younger generation stayed. The older generation went back to their villages. And within a year, they were totally saying, "This is not the same place anymore. There's no young people here," and so they eventually migrated to the city as well to be with their children and grandchildren. And so this was the way China ended up migrating most of those people.
Just to add to that story, even today, it's not easy for people to just pick up their bags and baggages and shift in China. You have to have a visa.
Oh yeah.
You have to have a
Well,
visa to
that's to the
travel.
cities. That's to the high demand cities. These were cities that were
Oh,
specifically
okay.
built in order to absorb the people from those. So it was policy. It was government policy to try to get everybody into geographic areas where they could provide the health care, provide the education, and all of those basics, the transportation infrastructure, the sanitation infrastructure, all that was provided. There's a number of good videos out there showing the kinds of jobs that because obviously a lot of the people that were coming from those remote locations did not have advanced skills. So they had to figure out a way how to give people jobs that they could build up from and develop skills.
The other layer of that story is that most of my friends in China now, they've all. I mean, I remember having general conversations with them over a glass of beer earlier because I didn't understand Chinese culture in 2006 to 2010, and I thought they were just like any other nation, and they're not.
Mhm.
And so I was like, so how your mom, and they would keep on saying my grandparent, my grandfather said this, my grandmother said this, my grandfather said this, I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, where's your mother and your father? They're like, we never grew up with them. It's like, what does
Mhm.
that mean? Because what happened was that these younger kids got a visa to travel to Shenzhen and Guangzhou and to work there.
Yeah.
Now the expenses are so high to live in these big cities that both the mother and the father would be working. They would have one child because at that time there was a one child policy,
Right.
and they would ship the child back to the village for the grandparents to
Yep.
take care of them
Yep.
because they just couldn't afford,
Yep.
or the infrastructure, the systems for childcare did not exist.
Yes.
They had to work 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day in their factories. So there was no way they could bring up a child. So they would
Well,
have a child.
it was
Then they would
also
ship the child.
at that time, there was a policy, if you were a migrant worker, your children could not go to the schools where
Yes.
you were,
Yes.
which was part of the reason why you had to
I
send your.
remember once from a town called Shunde, I was on a bus with a Chinese friend of mine. So she and I are sitting in the bus, and this is early. This is 2007, maybe 2008. We're going to Shenzhen, and it's a 7 8 hour drive. And along the highway, suddenly there are four police cars which stop the bus. We go on the side, and I'm like, "What happened?" So Yvonne is like, "I have no idea either." And then these cops come on board, and they pull out their guns, and they point the guns right at me and at Yvonne. And I froze. And this was my second or the third trip. I was like, what the hell? So, and I didn't realize because, it's so weird to have a gun pointed at you by 6 7 cops and 6 7 guns are pointing at you. I didn't even realize they were pointing to the couple behind me, on the seat behind me. And I just froze. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm gonna die today. Sorry for saying that. And so then I realized they go to the seat behind me. They pull them by their hair, drag them outside, beat the hell out of them. And we're all watching, and I'm like, what did they do? They're like, they don't have a visa to get into Shenzhen, so they were illegally trying to get into Shenzhen. I'm like, to pull out guns? Holy crap! So it's wild. I mean,
But
in many ways, it's quite wild.
yeah, but be careful. Switzerland is the same. You are not allowed to just simply go and move and relocate from one part of Switzerland to another part for a canton.
Really? I had no
So
idea.
I had one morning, I was working for a number of years in Zurich, and one morning I have a knock on the my door, and it's the police standing there wanting to check to make sure I had a authorization to stay there.
Wow.
And
Wow.
we had a friend who was working for Xerox, I think it was. And he was from Lugano in the south of Switzerland. And he was living in, and the police picked him up. He did not have the permission. And they sent him out.
Fascinating.
He had to
Fascinating.
quit his job. So, yeah. So, we have to be very careful when we think of these things. Obviously, with guns, although my parents were visiting when we were living in Germany in the 1960s, and there was a thing called the Baader Meinhof Group. It was sort of the revolutionary or the Red Army
Yes.
faction, I think it was
Red armor.
this gang, and they had kidnapped some industrialists and killed them. And so the police were after them. And my parents were driving onto an Autobahn. They were on the access to get onto the Autobahn. And the police were stopping everything, pointed a machine gun at my mother, and wanted to make sure that they were not transporting or had nobody in the trunk or whatever. So yeah, you just have to take a look at what's happening in the United States today with the immigrant situation. So these things happen all around the world. But
Yes,
okay,
yes.
what I'd like to do though is, we've been talking a little bit about what's good. Rather than we started off saying just simply what is. What did we discover was the cause or the drivers that caused the United States to be the way the United States is, caused China to be the way the China is, and we discovered a major factor is you had to have an abrupt break with tradition. You had to have that seems to be a prerequisite because otherwise inertia causes people to follow the trajectory of the lives of wherever they're at. If that's the way it is and people grow up and the expectation is you're going to do this and you're going to do that and that's the way it works, you do that. But it's only when there is something that disrupts your path of life that causes these significant societal changes and in which deal into economic changes, or maybe the economic and society changes sort of interact with one another.
Having said that, not all changes are good also.
No, that's the point I was getting at, is we had sort of gone from, well, this is what is to whether we think it's good. But I think for this, the rest of this session here, I'd like to focus us more on that, just what is or what was. So we saw this break in your trajectory of your life, and that, but it had to shift you to something. If you just had a break in your life, but nothing happened, and then after a couple of years, your life just was back to wherever it was, that didn't change much. But if the break caused you, as in the United States, to go into the defense industry and you had this pressure cooker and you learned to be an optimizer, you learned to be a striver for change, that became your new culture and your new tradition. The same thing happened in China. All those people, those millions, tens of millions of people that got pulled, sucked by the demand for labor into that pressure cooker along the east coast of China, to get the contracts and manufacture everything and have to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and better and better and better. And as we see today, China is no longer just known for copying stuff. They're innovators. And then partially, you go to Shenzhen, I mean, that's the maker capital of the world. But it's the mindset of the masses. It's not just a couple of people that say, let's do it this way. So that need to have the break in the flow of the tradition. And the second big break like that happened in the US in the 60s, where we went from almost nobody going to universities, 5% or so only, to having a very significant percent of the middle and upper class going to universities. It became the standard. That became the break in life because up until that point, if you grew up, the Rotary Club, for example, that I was in before I moved over to the eClub, the majority of the Rotary Club members in that club all went to the same high school, different years, but the same high school. But we have this thing called uh, happy bucks in the beginning of every meeting where everybody around the room says a little bit about what's going on in their lives and drops a few dollars into a pail. And they would always talk about their kids. And the interesting thing about it was none of them had kids living in that community. In other words, all the members of the Rotary Club grew up and they're now in the community where they grew up, but none of their kids are. Why? Because when you're in the United States and you go off to university and you learn a profession, you are now on the marketplace across the whole country here, and your loyalty is more to your profession than it is to a community, to a place. And almost nobody ends up going back to the community where they grew up because that profession, there's just not that many opportunities. Maybe a doctor, maybe a lawyer, an accountant, maybe they can go back. But most people, if you're in marketing or you're in so many fields, you're in IT, you're going where the best job opportunities are. And we've got this constant migration. That interrupted, that is a disruption in the life flow in the community for those young people that go to colleges. And so those trends, then, and you're in that position where you're, whatever job you've got, if you're in IT, you're a programmer or a programmer analyst or a systems analyst, you're constantly thinking, how do I improve this? Or you've got somebody from a department coming in saying, hey, how can I do more with this? How can I improve that? So you're constantly thinking. Already back in the 1980s, 70s, and 80s, the work I was doing, we were already thinking about how do we automate this systems development process. In the 90s, I led cloud technology at Chase Manhattan Bank. And what we did is we were constantly seeing how we could advance the technology to do more, to support more. And we actually developed, there's a system out of Germany called SAP. It's an enterprise level system. I then joined a company. We developed the first cloud type of a system that was the equivalent of SAP in the cloud. And in the process of doing that, we automated the process. We were able to come up with the first release of our system within 3 months. And this was because we basically were only developing about 5 to 10% of the code. That was already in the early 2000s. And that has there's just a constant drive where you've got literally now millions of software engineers who are thinking, how do I make that piece a little better? How do I make this piece a little better? And that's what's driving the AI. And if we take a look at the 2.5 years or almost 3 years now since the release of ChatGPT, where that more people became aware of the development that was going on there. And we see how did the changes since November of 2022, what drove most of that? And that was all those people who started off just as a user, who started to say, actually, why do I have to keep putting this into the prompt. Oh, we'll put in custom instructions. Why do I have to, let's make plugins so we can do more. And then that got absorbed. So everybody that was trying to build a business on plugins was sort of out of luck. But as we've seen every change, now we're at a point where we've got every day there are changes. There was a Thursday about 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, there was over 240 new features introduced on one single day to the top tier of AI products. This is going here, and there is no doubt we are going to end up. There is nothing, I repeat, nothing a human can do that AI or robotics cannot do better, really better, faster, cheaper, and safer than 99% of humans. We come out and try to explain, don't worry about it. The humans will, there's certain things AI can't do that humans can do. They bring out the example, well, a machine can't feel. So empathy. So a machine can never have the empathy of a human. But the fact of the matter is, the empathy that counts is not the empathetic feeling of the person with empathy. It's the projected result, how it's received by the recipient of that empathy. And we have studies that have now shown that the majority of humans prefer the empathy that they get from machines, from AI, than they get from human doctors. If they don't know, if it's coming from a human or coming from AI. And we're getting the same thing on emotional intelligence, creativity, every one of these, the evaluations are coming back that humans are finding the AI is doing a better job, even for relationships. And there's a very good interview that was done with Yuval Harari, the Israeli historian, who wrote those fantastic books, Homo Deus and Sapiens and so forth, where he says that the reason is AI is trained to please humans. And as a result, it learns to be a better human than humans. So the humans that it's interacting with find the humanity of the AI better than other humans. Again, we're back into, is it desirable or not desirable? Is that good or is that bad for society? But I think there's a factor. So as long as we're in this wave, which is now really pushed by the geopolitical conflict, if you would, taking place in the world, that used to be just Russia against the United States, then China against the United States, and let's face it, it's really moving bricks versus the West. That is really fueling. That's really fueling the whole AI drive right now. The United States has canceled almost every safeguard and said, you go full speed ahead. We have to win the AI war against China. And they're doing everything they can to put roadblocks in the way of China, not helping much because we're just encouraging China to work harder. But that's what's going on. And but what's important for us is to realize it's not AI. It's not about AI. AI is just a continuum of this competitive optimization mentality that has existed since the 50s, continuing on up. It's just how do we make tomorrow better? How do we, if I have a company, how do I reduce my cost? There's a thing called Industry 5.0, or in Japan's calling it Society 5.0, which is the idea to put humanity back into the center of all development. It is not likely to succeed because it's trying to go and take a economic model that is based on capitalism, private ownership, uh, supply and demand, and to say, okay, you have to serve something that's not in agreement with those goals. because to say I have to treat my employees equal to my customers means if you're producing, let's say, medications that are critical for survival, for health, you unless you can reduce the costs, you're withholding those medications from people that need it. But if to reduce the cost means I have to reduce my headcount or I have to pay them less, then you've got a conflict, and we're running into that world right now. Anyway, but we have so many people we haven't heard from. I'd like to hear from some of the rest of you. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of people leave. I guess it's because we're beyond the 2 hours. But Ingrid, Augustine, Mark, Henry, Daniel, please, we'd like to hear from you. Well, let me start off by asking Ingrid, are you still in Mozambique?
No, I'm actually in St. Louis right now. My granddaughter has a family weekend. And so I'm walking towards registration right now. I
Okay.
was driving when y'all started, and so I was preoccupied.
Well, what do you think about what we've been talking about here as a topic?
So I just got the last hour because we're staying actually at a Rotary family here and had breakfast. So I wasn't able to listen to the first hour. Probably the meat, what you were talking about, was in the first hour. Did I get that right?
Yeah. That was it. Basically, we were discussing what led to the incredible growth in the United States after World War II, pointing out that
Yeah.
how World War II became the driver that brought about the change because it disrupted people's lives. We had 1 out of every 5 Americans moved across the state line between 1940 and 1947, and that disrupted their traditional path of life, and they went to work either in the military or they went to work in the defense industry, where everything was about maximizing efficiency and production. And that became the culture of the US to become striving to compete, to always be improving every day, working to how can we do something better than we did it yesterday. And that's what's led all the way up to the AI of today.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to kind of listen to that part when you post um post this session because I wanted to hear it, but I wasn't able to.
Yeah, no, can understand that. Okay, and I want to hear a little bit about your time in Mozambique. So we'll talk a little later offline here then.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Great.
Mark Henry, what you've been here since the beginning. What are your thoughts to what we've been talking about?
No, I found the discussion very intriguing because I'm a firm believer that if you want to change things, you probably need to shake things around. I kind of am more of the mindset of transformation as opposed to continuous improvement, if we're to put it in simplest language. And so I find the specific examples of what catalyzed the change in the US, what catalyzed the change in China, and even just taking away from education, just how they did the housing,
Mhm.
relocate people, and then you find one generation it's not appealing, the next generation it's appealing. Things radically change, and I've just been thinking, yes, I've always believed that for developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa, really, we need to focus on two things, education and health. Once we crack those two, then people are empowered.
Mhm.
So I've just I found it very insightful to listen to the examples of the US and then ask myself, I'm no politician, I'm no military person, I'm not going to start any wars or whatever. So me and the group of Rotarians and other people in my circle of influence, how can we participate in catalyzing something that will affect millions?
Yeah,
You know,
and that's the
that's just what's
reason.
been crossing my mind and like, okay, let me keep listening on, but so what can we actually do?
Yeah.
So this good discussion can yield something practical down the years.
Yeah, and I think this is why when the young people from Africa, when they came up with that idea of Vision Africa 2030, how do you get the bulk of the population, or at least the bulk of the young population of Africa, seeking a changed world? Because if the world doesn't change, then everything will sort of continue the way it is. So to get people to be working, to be striving for a different world, the first thing is you've got to get them to believe that different world is worth fighting for. And that was the reason for trying to say, let's create videos. Let's maybe even create a competition across Africa. What group of young people can create the best video describing the Africa that could be here? Because and it's also maybe a little bit of even the Africa that was, because we've learned more and more in recent years that Africa at times was leading the world in a lot of different areas that between the colonial times and other issues that history got lost. And maybe that's a little bit about it, because I think one of the things we've seen in a lot of developing countries is a lot of people just don't believe they can have that kind of a difference, can make that kind of difference. And if you don't believe you can, you don't try. So the first thing is to give people a goal that they think is worth fighting for. The second thing is to be able to show a path that they believe could lead to that desirable future, and that's sort of the first prerequisite. At least that's our thinking. Daniel, do you want to add something to the discussion? Yes, Daniel, you're muted. You're still muted. Oh, there we go.
I'm just out and about, so I'm not really in a place where I can talk, but I'm enjoying all the discussions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you. By the way, before I forget, for Raj and anyone else that if you are not in my WhatsApp, I put my WhatsApp link in the chat so that you can contact me. So if you didn't get a directly addressed invite to the meeting here, but you like this and would like to join us in the future, please just send me a WhatsApp at that address. I'll just repeat it here because it could be a few chats back. It's WhatsApp. It's +1 for the United States, and then it's 908-377-5490. So just +1 908.
Can you just type it on chat?
Yeah, it's there. I already put it in chat, so you should be able to see it in the chat.
Just now?
Okay, I'll put it in there again.
Sorry. I just
Okay.
don't want numbers wrong.
Sure, no problem. Augustine, we haven't heard from you. Would you please, what are your thoughts about what we talked about?
Yeah, thank you, our chair, Mr. Bill, for this opportunity. So I have followed the conversation, but I think it is very important for us to be here and to make to have such a conversation to raise the awareness on what you have been teaching us. I think it is very, very important, especially for us in Africa, because in Africa we are still behind of other continents. So we need to make more efforts, so as to make sure that we are moving forward. And unfortunately, I have seen that this lesson you have been teaching or you have been providing, we are very few from Africa who are here to follow what you have been teaching. So I don't know how we can do in order to make sure that we're increasing in number so as to benefit with this essential knowledge. So that is my concern, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yes, I'm glad you pointed out, because when we look at Africa, as I mentioned here, the feeling we need, we can't focus on let's say those that are already getting the education. It's interesting to note that there's been this sense that education is the key to the future. So we've really invested in especially higher education. So those who manage to make it through the lower levels of education and get to the high level, so we've dramatically increased the number of university students and graduates in a lot of developing countries. But where do we find the highest unemployment among university graduates? It's in developing countries, because we didn't develop the market so that the demand, we didn't, by focusing on the elite, we didn't increase the per capita GDP of the country. And as a result, the country is not in a position to afford to pay for the advanced skills of those who get an advanced education. So their conclusion is, hey, we've got to go and migrate to where there's a market for the skills that we have. And this is why the former ambassador from the African Union to the United States, she used to point out there's more doctors from Ghana practicing in New York City than there are in Ghana. So the goal is, we've got to figure out, how do you turn your entire country of young people into strivers? That's really what happened in the United States and in China. The bulk of the populations were turned into strivers, constantly looking, how do we be better? How do we do more? And if you had that, and starting off with just the education, if every young person in Tanzania, for example, was a striver, striving to become world class in something, how different would Tanzania look in just 5 to 10 years? So this is, I believe, the challenge. And what's now a big challenge is, we say, okay, how do we turn all the young people into strivers? But this is happening at a time where AI is eliminating the value of the outcome of being a striver. If AI goes and eventually takes over every job that a human could do, um, why study? Why educate yourself, other than educating yourself to pursue your hobby? Because we could assume a lot of the people pushing AI and technology are saying that that could be paradise on earth. If we have AI and robots doing all the work, producing everything everybody needs, then people will be able to concentrate on whatever their true passion is. A lot of people today do work because they have to survive, but they're doing work they don't necessarily want to do or like to do. But so maybe they love the arts or they love music, but they're not good enough to actually make money at it, or not enough money to live on. But if your existence, your survival is satisfied by your share of the output of the AI and robots, now you can go and pursue that music, because you're pursuing the music because you love it, not because you have to make a living at it. And so this is the one possibility. The other possibility is, if we don't watch out, all the benefits of the AI and robots are going to uh, go to the top 1 or 2% who own all the AI and robots, and they might decide not to share. And in which case, we could end up with an incredible conflict between that owner class and what Yuval Harari has now defined as the useless class, economically useless, because nobody's going to hire a person who's going to cost 2 to 3 times more than AI or robots, and who's going to make a lot more mistakes than the humans are going to make, or than the AI or robots are going to make. So the we run into the situation where if we don't come up with a good sharing model, a post-labor economy sharing model, that the useless class is going to become hugely resentful of the owner class, and the owner class will become very fearful of the masses. They will become very fearful of that useless class, and the one side or the other might decide, okay, we can't resolve this peacefully, so we've got to act. And that 1 or 2%, you could say, well, what chance do they have against 98, 99% of the population? But if that 1 or 2% owns all the military robots and the like, it could be a very bad situation. So we've got to understand where this is going, get a sense for how much time we've got, which is very, very little, so that we can find a way to work towards a post-labor society that is fair and equitable for all, and provides everyone with the means of survival. And that is only going to happen if we can get that ball rolling in that direction before the events take us so far that the split is the gap is too wide, and that 1% doesn't feel any responsibility anymore to the other 99%. So, any thoughts of anybody on that? Oh, by the way, hi, Rafia. It's very good to see you. Wish you had been with us since the beginning, because I think you could have added some interesting insights. Okay. Rafia has been with us on and off for, I think, about 7 years now. She's from Ghana, and has very interesting experiences. Okay. I don't see any further comments at this time. We are now 2 hours and 40 minutes, if I even count the grace time we have at the beginning. We're a good 2.5 hours into the meeting. And I think we've hit upon most of the items that we had on the agenda to talk about. What I will do is I will try to process this as quickly as possible, and I'll add that I mentioned in the beginning I have I've now uploaded to YouTube the past 3 meetings, the recordings, and I'll add this to that list, and then I will send out the link to the channel that actually has other meetings going back a year. But keep in mind, our meetings are long. This is going to be a shorter meeting. Last week we went over 4 hours, and because of there was a lot of discussion. So I would say if there are no other comments, let's call this meeting to an end. And we will pick up, we'll probably add more demo of some of the AI capabilities, because there's a lot that was introduced this week, and will continue on to next week. Last week, we had a very good session. About 3/4 of the meeting was demonstration of AI tools that allow anybody to learn anything. You can take a 10-year-old and have them become an expert in quantum physics to the point where they could write their own world-class book on it within 3 to 6 months. So we'll be looking more at those kind of capabilities. Another thing here I'd like us to discuss in one of the next meetings, one of our members in India, Sunita Gandhi, she used to work at the World Bank, and but since she's back in India, she spent a decade working on approaches for education, for literacy and foundation numeracy. And we've been able to grow that, or she's been able to grow that program from a couple of schools to over 35,000 schools in just a couple of years. We've now got hundreds of thousands of students who are able to go from as young as 5 or 6 that are totally illiterate. and be able to read newspapers within less than 2 months. This is amazing progress. There's about 5 or 6 countries now in the world that are looking at picking up that. An entire district in Ghana is now using that approach. It requires no technology. It costs almost nothing per student to learn to read and do basic numeracy. And you don't even need a formally trained teacher. You can train a volunteer in a couple of hours to be able to administer the program. So this is something that could be tremendous breakthrough for so many areas where the big problem is that children start school without having the prerequisites to be able to understand what's going on in the schools with literacy. And we see in some of the sub-Saharan African countries the illiteracy rate is almost 90%, 89, 88, 89%. And if we could get to where we have 100% of especially young people, people in school, which right now 50% of 10-year-olds, fourth graders in the world cannot read effectively. Germany, for example, the year before last, they published the result of one of their major national tests that 1 out of every 4 fourth graders in Germany cannot read effectively. So in the United States, I think it's between 40 and 45% of fourth graders cannot read effectively. And that's a big, big increase since before COVID. Okay. But anyway, so these are some of the things we would like to get to because, again, if you're in sub-Saharan Africa, if you're in South Asia, just think of how big a difference that would make if all of your young people were able to read and then be able to take advantage of AI to further their knowledge and education. The big drive is going to be away from just-in-case knowledge to just-in-time knowledge. And being able to master AI will be crucial for that. And the cost for access to AI is going to be dropping down to almost zero. So it can help developing countries at least leapfrog in the education side of things. And then we just need to make sure everybody's a striver. But if you can't read and don't have basic numeracy, it's very difficult for you to believe in yourself to become a striver. So that's one of the things we want to tackle. Okay, it's Rafia. I see your note here. What district in Ghana? It's the southern district on the border to what is it, Togo, I think. That's the district there. I can send you. We have a report from the education minister for the district there, and I know there's a proposal to the Ministry of Education for all of Ghana to spread that throughout the rest of Ghana. But I can send you the PDF that describes that. Okay, so with that, I thank everyone. And hopefully we will get back together next week. Bye all.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Right.
Good night.
Sure. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.